In 2024, a survey vessel working in the South Pacific recorded something that should not have existed. It was not a shipwreck. It was not a reef dot. It was not a volcanic ridge. It was a shape, a geometric shape, more than 600 meters below the surface, in a part of the ocean believed to be empty. The sonar returned clean lines, angles, walls, symmetry, and for 17 minutes, every system on board began to fail at the exact same time. When power returned, one of the technicians said he had heard something through his headset. Not a mechanical noise, not static, a low, distant sound, like metal grinding open somewhere deep below them. There are still vast parts of the ocean floor that human beings have never truly seen. We have maps, but many of them are broad guesses. We have sonar images, but most are incomplete. We have satellites that can estimate the shape of the seabed from orbit, but the fine details remain hidden under miles of black water. In some places, we know the surface of Mars more clearly than the landscape beneath our own oceans. That is what makes the sea so dangerous to the human imagination. It is not just dark dot, it is unfinished. It hides entire mountain ranges, trenches, faults, extinct volcanoes, and ancient scars in the earth. Places where pressure crushes steel, where sunlight has never entered, where sound travels farther than sight ever could. And sometimes, very rarely, the ocean gives back an image that does not belong, something too regular, too intentional, too silent. The structure in this case was discovered in a remote sector of the South Pacific, nearly 800 nautical miles from the nearest inhabited island. No shipping routes crossed the area. No military records placed installations nearby. Geological surveys from the last 40 years described the region as uneven seabed, sediment layers, and scattered basalt outcrops. Nothing more. Nothing built. Nothing known. And yet, when the survey team looked down through their instruments, they saw the outline of something that should never have been there, something large enough to appear on sonar, something old enough to be buried, something that had never been on any map. The mission itself was ordinary. A multinational marine research program had been contracted to study tectonic stress zones in the southern Pacific Basin. The goal was simple. They wanted to place long-term acoustic sensors along a fracture system where unusual, low-frequency vibrations had been recorded over the past 3 years. These vibrations were not unheard of. Deep earth movement, underwater landslides, shifting sediment, hydrothermal activity. The ocean makes noise constantly. But what drew attention was the pattern, the signals repeated, not evenly, not like a machine, but in clusters. Always from the same general region. Always at depths between 500 and 700 meters. Always during periods of low seismic activity, when the surrounding crust should have been relatively quiet. To investigate, the team deployed a high-resolution multi-beam sonar system from a research vessel called the Astor Vale on paper. It was one of the best-equipped civilian marine platforms in the region. It carried autonomous underwater vehicles, deep imaging tools, magnetic anomaly sensors, and a remotely operated vehicle rated for abyssal work. The area they entered was known for rough currents and unstable weather. Cold water upwelling from deeper layers often carried fine sediment into suspension, reducing visibility below. The seabed itself was believed to be fractured and irregular, shaped by ancient tectonic movement and volcanic deposits. That mattered because the ocean can create illusions. Rock formations can resemble walls. Basalt columns can appear arranged. Landslide debris can produce false geometry. Scientists know this. They are trained to distrust the first image. But even before visual confirmation, The first scan from the Astor Vale produced a problem no one on board could easily dismiss. The shape below them did not look natural. It looked planned. The primary sonar map revealed a broad rectangular perimeter cut into the seabed, roughly 400 meters long, nearly 200 meters wide. Along one side ran parallel ridges, evenly spaced. The central section rose in tiers, like stepped platforms or collapsed roofs. And at the northern edge, partially buried under silt, there appeared to be a circular formation with an open center. No known volcanic process created geometry like that on such a scale. No catalogued wreck matched it. No pipeline, cable station, or drilling infrastructure had ever been authorized in that sector. The first reaction on board was simple disbelief. The second was silence. Because once the room stopped talking, everyone saw the same thing. The structure was aligned, not randomly, not by the slope of the seabed. It was oriented almost perfectly east to west. The discovery happened just after 2:13 a.m. Night on the open ocean has a strange quality. The world becomes sound before it becomes sight. Wind across rails, low engine vibration, distant water striking steel. Inside the sonar lab, the only light came from screens. When the operator first noticed the anomaly, he thought it was a data error. A sharp-edged return had appeared where the map should have shown only sediment and broken rock. He ran the pass, then ran it again from a slightly altered heading. The shape remained. Word spread quietly through the vessel. A navigation officer entered first, then the mission lead, then 2 engineers in thermal jackets, still half awake. They stood behind the screens and watched as the image sharpened. A rectangular boundary emerged from the noise, then internal divisions, then a long recessed corridor leading toward the center. Someone asked if it was a wreck. Someone else said it was too large. At 2:31 a.m., the captain ordered the vessel into holding position while a second scan was prepared. Sea conditions were stable. Currents were manageable. There was no obvious reason not to proceed. At 2:36 a.m., as the sonar array passed over the site again, all 3 auxiliary systems failed within 5 seconds. The lab lights flickered to monitors went black. The acoustic feed cut into a burst of static. On the bridge, navigation temporarily lost depth correction. In engineering, voltage spiked, then dropped. The backup channel activated automatically, but for 17 full minutes, nearly every non-essential system on board behaved erratically. Some rebooted, some froze, some displayed corrupted data. One technician later reported that during the outage, his headset carried a noise from the hydrophone line even though the hydrophones had gone offline. He described it as a prolonged metallic resonance, like a door moving under pressure. Another crew member, stationed near the aft deck, claimed he felt vibration beneath his boots that did not match engine output or wave impact. The systems returned slowly. No fire, no short circuit, no clear electrical fault. At 2:58 a.m., the sonar recording resumed, and what it showed disturbed them even more. A section of the structure that had appeared closed on the first pass now looked open. Not collapsed. Open, as if part of the seabed image had changed between scans. By sunrise, the crew had shifted from surprise to procedure. The first step was verification. Faulty sonar, misread terrain, software corruption, all were possible. The team recalibrated the multibeam system, cross-checked navigation logs, and compared raw returns with backup storage. The anomaly remained present across multiple data sets. Next came magnetometer readings. If the formation was a wreck or modern structure, there should have been a clear metallic signature. The data came back weak and inconsistent, not absent, but far lower than expected. It was as if the material below was either heavily mineralized stone or some alloy degraded beyond recognition. The vessel then launched an autonomous underwater vehicle equipped with side-scan imaging and environmental sensors. The AUV descended without issue. At 300 meters, all data streams were normal. At 480 meters, the first oddity appeared. The onboard compass began to drift only slightly at first, then enough to trigger correction protocols. By 560 meters, the AUV camera feed was degrading in pulses, not because of sediment, not because of darkness. The image itself seemed to distort in rhythmic bursts, as if the signal path were briefly warping and returning. Then the vehicle passed over the outer boundary. Its depth held steady. Its forward motion slowed. And for 11 seconds, every external microphone on the platform captured the same sound, a steady knocking. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Pause. Then silence. The AUV completed one partial orbit of the site before its uplink dropped completely. Emergency return protocols activated, but instead of rising immediately, the vehicle remained stationary near the central depression for almost 4 minutes. When it resurfaced, it was damaged, not crushed, not imploded, damaged in ways that made less sense. The forward casing was scored by long parallel abrasions, all at nearly equal spacing. One manipulator arm was bent backward. The sensor housing had been partially stripped of its outer coating, and embedded in a seam near the left thruster were fine pale strands that looked biological. Lab analysis identified them only as marine organic material with degraded protein structure, not enough to classify, not enough to explain why they were wrapped tightly around a metal seam in deep open water. The team should have reported the site and withdrawn. Instead, they stayed, partly because of the data, partly because no one on board wanted to be the first to say what they were all beginning to suspect, that whatever lay below them was not just unusual terrain. It interacted with things that approached it. A remotely operated vehicle was deployed that same evening. Unlike the autonomous unit, the ROV would remain tethered to the ship by cable, allowing direct control and a continuous power supply. Its descent was broadcast to the entire operations room. The water darkened quickly. At 100 meters, the light from the surface vanished. At 300, only the vehicle lamps remained. By 600, the seabed emerged from blackness like a wall of dust and stone. Then the lamps touched the outer edge of the structure. What the cameras revealed was not a ruin in the way anyone expected. There were no statues, no arches, no obvious carvings. It looked industrial, but old beyond measure. Flat plains rose from the sediment at impossible angles, coated in manganese crust and marine growth. Sections of wall met at near-perfect corners. Narrow channels ran between elevated surfaces, too regular to be erosion. Here and there, the outer shell had fractured, exposing darker layers beneath that reflected almost no light. The ROV moved slowly along one corridor. Its beams passed over a recessed opening in the floor, then a second, then a line of circular apertures, each identical in diameter. One engineer whispered that they looked like vents. Another said they looked like sockets. At 1914 local time, the vehicle reached the central section. That is when the feed began to fail. The video distortion did not begin all at once. First came static along the lower frame, then horizontal tearing, then brief moments where the image lagged behind the vehicle's movement, creating a ghost trail of its own lights. But even through the interference, the crew saw enough. Inside the central depression stood a vertical form, half buried and taller than the reef itself. It was smooth, dark, and unnaturally straight. Around it, the seafloor had been cleared of sediment in a near-perfect circle, as if currents avoided that one place. The pilot tried to maneuver closer. The control response delayed by nearly 2 seconds. Then the audio channel activated on its own. No one had enabled it. A low-frequency hum filled the room. Beneath it was something else. A repeating pulse too slow to be speech, too patterned to ignore. The acoustic specialist isolated the waveform and froze. The spacing between the pulses matched one of the unexplained low frequency signal clusters that had brought them to the region in the first place. The site had not just resembled the source. It was the source. Then more clues began to surface. The sediment around the outer wall contained elevated traces of rare earth elements in concentrations unusual for the local geology. Microscopic imaging showed fragments of smooth, black material mixed with natural seabed particles. The fragments had no obvious crystal structure. The damaged UV carried residue that appeared slightly magnetic at room temperature, then lost that property when dried. One of the ROV still frames, taken seconds before the main feed failed, showed markings along an inner panel. They were not letters, not corrosion patterns, more like repeating grooves arranged in nested sequences. Some researchers thought they were stress fractures. Others disagreed. Because the grooves repeated at measured intervals with almost no deviation. The most disturbing clue came from the ship's raw audio archive. Hours after the second dive, a junior technician reviewed the system noise captured during the first power failure. Buried under the distortion was a pattern no one had noticed in real time, a series of short tones, 7 in total. Then a pause. Then the same 7 tones played again, slightly slower. The pattern did not match any onboard alarm, any marine beacon, or any known acoustic marker in the region. But when the technician overlaid the timing against the ROV's later hum signal, the intervals aligned, different frequencies, same pattern. Something below had repeated itself twice, once before they saw it, once after. The mission should have ended there. Instead, an emergency request was sent to a partner institute on the mainland for archival bathymetric data. The crew wanted to know whether older surveys, even poor ones, had ever captured the same anomaly. The answer came the next day. No maps showed the structure. But one classified Cold War-era naval scan from 1971 showed a blank zone in almost the exact same location. Not an anomaly, a gap. À délibérat omission. The archived notes attached to that scan were incomplete, but one line remained readable. Seafloor return inconsistent. Artificial geometry suspected. Area removed pending review. No review was ever found. No public reference existed. No follow-up mission was logged, which meant someone had likely seen the site more than 50 years earlier and chosen not to record it in any normal system. That discovery changed everything on board. This was no newly exposed ruin. No recent wreck. No accidental sonar illusion. It had been there for decades, possibly far longer, hidden not just by the ocean but by silence. The team prepared one final descent. The ROV was rerouted toward a fracture in the outer shell where the darker inner material had been exposed. The opening was narrow, but wide enough for a camera array to enter. Inside, the beam revealed a cavity. The walls were smooth, dry-looking, almost, despite being deep underwater. Not dry in reality, but untouched by the heavy marine growth coating the exterior. The passage angled down into darkness. At 18 meters in, the ROV lights caught something on the floor, a shape. Small compared to the structure. Too symmetrical to be rock. The pilot moved closer. It was a helmet, or something very close to one. Rounded, partially buried, with a fractured faceplate and a ring mount around the base. Not antique, not ancient. 20th century at the earliest. There were no bodies nearby, no wreckage. No other equipment. Just that single object lying inside a passage where no human expedition was supposed to have gone. Then the cable tension alarm sounded. The tether had gone taut. Not from current, from resistance. Something behind the vehicle was pulling it deeper into the passage. The pilot increased thrust. The line strain rose. For 3 seconds, the camera spun. The last stable frame showed the cavity wall to the left, covered in long vertical marks, as if something had been dragged against it many times. Then the feed cut. When the ROV was recovered, 37 meters of tether were gone, not snapped. Missing. The severed end looked smooth. So what was the structure beneath the ocean? The first theory is that it was a lost human installation, a covert facility built during the Cold War, then abandoned and erased. Its industrial appearance supports that idea. So does the 1971 naval record. The helmet found inside suggests prior human presence. Perhaps it was a listening post, a weapons test platform, a deep acoustic observatory hidden from rival powers. But the problems are severe. The scale was enormous. The material was unknown. And placing such a structure at that depth, in that location, would have required engineering capabilities far beyond what any public program admitted at the time. The second theory is geological misinterpretation shaped by human perception. Some scientists argue the structure may be an extremely unusual basalt formation combined with tectonic fracturing, mineral crust, and sonar bias. The repeating grooves, the corridors, the central column, the circular depressions, all could, in theory, be patterns formed by natural stress and erosion. But that explanation struggles with the alignment, the internal cavity, the helmet, and the repeated acoustic sequences. Nature creates patterns. It does not usually repeat them like a signal. The third theory is the one few researchers will say aloud, that the site was neither fully natural nor fully human, that it may have been something older, a structure built in a coastline or basin long before sea levels rose, later submerged, buried, and forgotten, or something stranger still, a place adapted, reused, or occupied by different hands across different eras that could explain the conflicting evidence. Ancient foundation. Later intrusion, modern secrecy, and a system, somehow, still active enough to answer when approached. No theory closes the case. Each one leaves the same cold space in the center. The official report was never fully released. The expedition ended 2 days later after worsening weather forced the vessel away from the site. Public summaries described unusual geological features and instrumentation instability. No structure was mentioned. No archival naval reference was acknowledged. No recovered helmet appeared in the final inventory. Months passed. Then one of the former technicians contacted an independent journalist. He did not provide documents, he provided audio. A short clip taken from the ship's internal archive on the night before they left the site. At first, it sounds like ordinary vessel noise, engines, air circulation. Distant movement in the hull, then a tone emerges. Low, steady, metallic. After that, 7 pulses, a pause. 7 pulses again. And finally, just before the recording ends, another sound appears in the background, not from the sea. From somewhere inside the ship. A heavy impact. Then another. Then another. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Pause. Exactly the same pattern the AUV microphones had recorded near the structure below. Crew logs from that night mention an inspection of the lower equipment deck after unidentified hull vibration. Nothing was found. No breach, no loose machinery, no animal strike, no source. But there is one final detail. The inspection team signed their report at 3:17 a.m., the same time, to the minute, that the unexplained low-frequency signal first appeared again in the water beneath them, as if whatever had been below the ship was no longer just beneath it, as if it had recognized the attention and answered. If something impossible has been sitting on the ocean floor for decades, hidden from every map, every chart, and every ordinary record, then how many more structures are still down there, waiting in the dark for someone to notice them?